Your Kellyanne Conway, Trump's former campaign manager and White House counselor, had come ready for battle. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, calm and composed in her navy blazer, completely unaware she was about to become a viral sensation. The topic was explosive, the Freedom to Vote Act. Conway had her talking points. Ready? Her aggressive debate style polished from years of cable news warfare. Crockett had something different, unshakable composure and a lawyer's precision with facts. This so-called voting rights bill is nothing but a federal takeover, Conway declared, her voice already rising before the host finished his introduction. And I'm tired of freshman politicians pretending they understand election law. But instead of matching Conway's aggression, Crockett did something unexpected. She smiled. Thank you for sharing your perspective, Kellyanne. I'd love to discuss the specific provisions you're concerned about. That calm response was gasoline on Conway's fire. Her face flushed red as she leaned forward, pointing across the table. Don't patronize me. I was managing presidential campaigns when you were still in law school. The host tried to regain control, but Conway was just getting started. What happened next would break the internet, spawn thousands of memes, and turn a policy debate into a masterclass on political communication. Because while Conway brought volume, Crockett brought something more powerful: facts, composure, and the kind of quiet authority that can't be shouted down. The cameras captured every second as America watched two completely different styles of political leadership collide. One relied on interruption and accusation. The other used patience and precision. In the next 30 minutes, viewers would witness Conway's complete meltdown as she screamed at Crockett for being too reasonable, while the Congresswoman never once raised her voice or lost her composure. Before we dive into this incredible exchange, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments. Do you prefer politicians who fight fire with fire or ice with fire? You're about to see why millions chose ice. But to truly understand what happened in that studio, we need to know who these women really are and why this confrontation meant so much more than just another cable news argument. Kellyanne Conway at 57 was a political veteran who had survived every storm Washington could throw at her. Former campaign manager for Donald Trump's shocking 2016 presidential victory, former White House counselor, and the architect of alternative facts, a phrase that would haunt American political discourse for years. Conway had built her reputation on never backing down from a fight. She went toe-to-toe with the toughest journalists in Washington, turning press briefings into verbal combat zones. Her strategy was always the same: interrupt, overwhelm, dominate. She rarely debated to win minds. She debated to exhaust them, to make viewers believe her opponent's silence meant defeat rather than disgust. She came into this studio with absolute confidence, dressed in her signature crisp white blazer over a black top, blonde hair perfectly styled, blue eyes sharp with the intensity of someone who had survived every political storm. Conway had notebooks full of talking points, years of experience handling hostile media, and the absolute certainty that she could overwhelm any opponent with sheer force of personality. But sitting across from her was someone completely different. Jasmine Crockett, at 42, represented a new generation of political leaders. A former public defender turned civil rights attorney turned politician, Crockett had built her career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She won her congressional seat by connecting with voters who felt forgotten by traditional politicians. Her story didn't begin under television studio lights or in the halls of Congress. It began in courtrooms and community meetings, where the stakes weren't ratings, but lives. Before America knew her as a sharp-tongued, quick-witted member of Congress, she was a lawyer who stood up for the voiceless, often in rooms where she was the only black woman present. Those early years forged the steel of her character. They taught her that dignity wasn't a luxury, it was armor. Her reputation as an attorney was built on relentless commitment to justice, taking cases others shied away from not because they were easy, but because they were necessary. When Crockett entered politics, she brought that courtroom clarity with her. She didn't walk into debates looking for drama. She walked in armed with facts, strategy, and a composure that unsettled even seasoned adversaries. In committee hearings, she became known for her quick wit, slicing through convoluted talking points with single-pointed questions. Unlike Conway's decades in the political machine, Crockett's power came from her ability to stay calm under pressure and speak directly to people's real concerns. She chose her outfit carefully that morning, a navy blue blazer that conveyed authority without being flashy, minimal jewelry, hairstyled simply. Everything about her appearance said professional, approachable, unintimidated. She had different preparation than Conway's talking points and attack strategies. Crockett had something much more powerful, absolute confidence in her own truth and the ability to stay calm when others lost control. This wasn't just another political debate. This was a clash between two completely different philosophies of political combat. Conway represented the old school, the idea that you win by being louder, more aggressive, more willing to attack. Crockett represented something new, the power of staying calm, speaking truth, and letting your opponent defeat themselves. The topic that brought them together was the Freedom to Vote Act, legislation that had divided Congress and the country. Conway had come to defend the traditional conservative position that the bill represented federal overreach and would enable voter fraud. Crockett was there to advocate for expanded voting access and election security measures. But everyone in that studio knew this was about much more than policy. This was about two different visions of how political discourse should work in America. Conway's approach: flood the zone with noise until truth suffocates. Crockett's approach: let truth cut through noise like a blade. The host, sensing the tension crackling between them, tried to start with softball questions about their backgrounds and qualifications. But Conway wasn't interested in softball. She had come for a fight, and she was going to get one, just not the kind she expected. Conway's strategy was clear from the moment she sat down. Overwhelm Crockett with aggressive questioning, force her into defensive positions, and use her decades of experience to make the younger Congresswoman look inexperienced and unprepared. It was a strategy that had worked countless times before against other politicians and journalists. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't other politicians, and Conway was about to learn that the hard way. The cameras rolled, the lights heated up, and America was about to witness a masterclass in how composure can be more powerful than aggression, how truth can be more effective than tactics, and how sometimes the person who speaks quietly can be heard louder than the person who screams. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife as the host opened the segment. We're here today to discuss the Freedom to Vote Act currently before Congress. Joining us are former White House counselor Kellyanne Conway and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas. Conway didn't even wait for a question. She launched immediately into attack mode. "Let me be clear from the start," Conway said, her voice already rising. "This so-called voting rights bill is nothing but a federal takeover of elections designed to help Democrats steal votes. And I'm tired of freshman politicians like Miss Crockett here pretending they understand the complexities of election law." Crockett sat perfectly still, her hands folded, a slight smile on her face. "Thank you, Kellyanne. I appreciate you sharing your perspective." The calm response seemed to infuriate Conway even more. Her face flushed red as she leaned forward. "Don't patronize me, Congresswoman. I was managing presidential campaigns when you were still in law school. I know what voter fraud looks like, and this bill makes it easier." "Actually," Crockett replied, her voice steady and clear, "I'd love to hear about specific examples of the voter fraud you're concerned about. What evidence are you referencing?" Conway's eyes flashed. This wasn't going according to her script. She was used to opponents who would match her aggression, who would raise their voices and get pulled into shouting matches. But Crockett's calm professionalism was throwing her completely off balance. "Evidence?" Conway's voice cracked as it got higher. "The evidence is everywhere. Dead people voting, illegal immigrants voting, ballot harvesting in swing states. But politicians like you don't want to acknowledge." Crockett sat perfectly still, her hands folded, a slight smile on her face. "Thank you, Kellyanne. I appreciate you sharing your perspective." The calm response seemed to infuriate Conway even more. Her face flushed red as she leaned forward. "Don't patronize me, Congresswoman. I was managing presidential campaigns when you were still in law school. I know what voter fraud looks like, and this bill makes it easier." "Actually," Crockett replied, her voice steady and clear, "I'd love to hear about specific examples of the voter fraud you're concerned about." "What evidence are you referencing?" Conway's eyes flashed. This wasn't going according to her script. She was used to opponents who would match her aggression, who would raise their voices and get pulled into shouting matches. But Crockett's calm professionalism was throwing her completely off balance. "Legit because it doesn't fit your narrative." Behind the cameras, the studio crew was exchanging glances. The sound engineer adjusted his headphones, wincing as Conway's voice hit frequencies that made the equipment protest. The director quietly signaled to keep rolling. This was television gold, even if it wasn't the kind anyone had expected. In The control room, producers were frantically checking social media feeds. Already, clips were being shared in real time by viewers watching the live broadcast. Comments were pouring in. Is Conway okay? And Crockett is handling this like a boss and this is painful to watch. The host tried to interject. Can we focus on the specific provisions of the bill? No, Conway shouted, cutting him off. I'm tired of being interrupted. I'm tired of being lectured by people who don't know what they're talking about. This woman, she pointed directly at Crockett. This woman has been in Congress for what, 2 years? And she thinks she can come on here and school me about politics. Throughout Conway's outburst, Crockett remained completely calm. She took a sip of water, checked her notes briefly, and maintained the same pleasant expression. When Conway finally paused to breathe, Crockett spoke in the same measured tone. I understand you're passionate about this issue, Kellyanne. Passion is important in politics, but I think our viewers would benefit from discussing actual facts rather than talking points. Conway's face went from red to purple. Facts? You want to talk about facts? The fact is that you and your party are trying to destroy election integrity in this country. You're trying to make it impossible for states to verify that voters are who they say they are. Which specific provision of the bill are you referring to? Crockett asked calmly. Because I have the legislation right here if you'd like to discuss specific language. Conway slammed her hand on the desk. Don't play games with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. This bill eliminates voter ID requirements, allows ballot harvesting, and prevents states from cleaning up their voter rolls. It's a recipe for chaos. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate you raising those concerns. However, the bill actually strengthens voter ID requirements by ensuring all Americans have access to free identification. It doesn't eliminate ID requirements. It makes them more accessible. Would you like me to show you the specific section? Conway was now visibly shaking with anger. Stop trying to manipulate the facts. I know what this bill says. I've read it cover to cover and I know what your real agenda is. What do you believe my agenda is? Crockett asked with genuine curiosity. Your agenda is to make it easier for Democrats to cheat, Conway screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that made the sound engineers wince. Your agenda is to flood the system with illegal votes so you can stay in power. That's what this is really about. The studio fell silent except for Conway's heavy breathing. She realized she had just accused a sitting congresswoman of conspiracy to commit election fraud on live television, and even she seemed to understand she had gone too far. But this was just the beginning. Conway's meltdown was about to get much worse. Crockett let the silence hang for a moment. Then, in the same calm voice she had used throughout the entire exchange, she said, Kellyanne, I took an oath to defend the Constitution. Every vote I cast, every bill I support is guided by that oath and by my commitment to serving the people who elected me. I believe democracy is stronger when more eligible Americans can participate in it. Conway tried to recover. That's exactly the kind of political speak I'm talking about. You say one thing, but you mean another. What do you think I mean? Crockett asked. Conway's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had built her entire attack around the assumption that Crockett would respond with equal aggression, giving Conway the chance to escalate further. But every calm question, every measured response, every refusal to take the bait was making Conway look more unhinged by the minute. The host, sensing the dynamic, tried to give Conway a lifeline. Let's talk about specific state election laws. I don't need help, Conway snapped at him. I can handle this myself. She turned back to Crockett, her voice now hoarse from shouting. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think because you stay calm and use your lawyer voice that you're winning this debate? Crockett tilted her head slightly. I don't think of this as something to win or lose, Kellyanne. I think of it as an opportunity to have a conversation about how we can make our democracy work better for everyone. Conway stared at her in disbelief. She had thrown everything she had at this woman, personal attacks, conspiracy theories, accusations of treason. And Crockett had responded to all of it with the same unflappable professionalism. The cameras captured every second of Conway's meltdown and Crockett's composure. Social media was already exploding with clips of Conway screaming while Crockett remained calm. Jasmine Crockett was starting to trend, and Conway meltdown wasn't far behind. But the real fireworks were still to come. Because Conway, realizing that her usual tactics weren't working, was about to make a desperate attempt to regain control. Conway was spiraling, and everyone in the studio could see it. Her carefully styled hair was now slightly disheveled from her animated gestures. Her face remained flushed red, and her voice had gone hoarse from shouting. The makeup artist in the wings was shaking her head, knowing there wasn't enough powder in the world to fix what was happening to Conway's appearance on camera. Security personnel near the studio entrance had subtly moved closer, not because they expected physical violence, but because Conway's emotional state was becoming genuinely concerning. The show's medical consultant, always on standby during live broadcasts, was quietly checking her blood pressure monitor and wondering if she should intervene. But instead of recognizing that she was losing control, Conway decided to escalate even further. "You know what your problem is," Conway said, pointing a shaking finger at Crockett. "Your problem is that you think being calm makes you right. You think that because you don't raise your voice, people will think you're the adult in the room. But I see right through you." Crockett maintained her composed posture, hands still folded, expression still pleasant. "What do you see, Kellyanne?" "I see a politician who's trying to manipulate people." Conway's voice cracked as she reached a new decibel level. "I see someone who thinks she can come on television and act all sweet and reasonable while she's pushing legislation that will destroy our democracy." The host made another attempt to regain control. "Perhaps we could discuss the constitutional issues." "The Constitution?" Conway whirled on him. "Don't talk to me about the Constitution. I defended the Constitution for 4 years in the White House, while she was probably still figuring out how to be a politician." She spun back to face Crockett, her entire body now trembling with rage. "You want to talk about the Constitution? The Constitution doesn't say anywhere that we have to make voting so easy that fraud becomes inevitable. The Constitution doesn't say that we have to ignore common-sense security measures." Crockett nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right that the Constitution doesn't say those things. What it does say in the 14th and 15th Amendments is that all citizens have the right to vote, and that this right cannot be denied or abridged. The question is how we balance security with access." Conway slammed both hands on the desk this time, making her water glass jump, and then she said the words that would define this moment forever. "Stop being so reasonable." The studio fell dead silent. Conway had just screamed at someone for being reasonable. The absurdity of it hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Crockett let the silence stretch for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was even calmer than before, almost gentle. "Kellyanne," she said, and there was something in her tone, not condescending, not angry, but almost compassionate. "I can see that you're upset, and I understand why these issues matter so much to you. They matter to me too. But I think we can disagree about policy without questioning each other's character or motives." Conway stared at her in stunned silence. For the first time since the segment began, she seemed at a loss for words. The transformation in the studio was immediate and palpable. The woman who had entered with such confidence ready to demolish a younger opponent now looked exhausted and confused. But Crockett wasn't finished. She was about to deliver the lesson that would turn this viral moment into a masterclass in political communication. Crockett continued, her voice still gentle, but now carrying the authority of someone who had found her moment. "You've spent a lot of time today talking about what you think I believe and what you think I'm trying to do. But you haven't asked me a single question about what I actually believe or why I support this legislation." Conway's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "So, let me tell you," Crockett said, leaning forward slightly. "I support this bill because I've seen what happens when people can't vote. I was a public defender for years before I came to Congress. I saw how many of my clients had been disenfranchised by the justice system. I saw elderly people who couldn't get to the DMV to renew their ID. I saw working parents who couldn't take time off to vote during limited hours." She paused, her eyes never leaving Conway's face. "I saw a woman in her 80s who had voted in every election since the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, but couldn't get the documents she needed for a new ID after her house burned down. I saw a veteran who lost his legs in Afghanistan, but couldn't access his polling place because it wasn't wheelchair accessible." The studio was completely quiet now. Even the camera operators had stopped their subtle movements, transfixed by Crockett's testimony. "I saw college students who had to choose between waiting 6 hours in line to vote or going to work to pay their tuition. I saw Native American communities whose nearest polling place was 3 hours away by car, if they had a car." Conway tried to interrupt, but her voice came out as a whisper. That's not what this bill—" "I didn't support this bill because I want Democrats to win," Crockett continued, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience. "I supported it because I want democracy to win, because I've seen what happens when we make it harder for eligible Americans to exercise. their most fundamental right. She pulled out her copy of the legislation, its pages marked with sticky notes and handwritten comments. This bill requires states to provide free voter identification. It mandates early voting periods, so working parents don't have to choose between their paycheck and their ballot. It ensures polling places are accessible to voters with disabilities. It allows college students to use their student IDs to vote. Conway found her voice, but it was barely audible. The fraud prevention measures are strengthened, not weakened, Crockett said, flipping to a marked section. The bill requires paper ballot backups for all electronic voting systems. It mandates post-election audits. It creates criminal penalties for anyone who tries to intimidate voters or interfere with election systems. She looked up at Conway with something approaching sympathy. Kellyanne, I think we actually want the same things. We want elections that are secure, accessible, and trustworthy. We want every eligible American to be able to vote, and we want every vote to be counted accurately. The question is how we achieve those goals. Conway looked down at her own notes, shuffling through papers that now seemed inadequate. When she looked up, some of the fight had gone out of her eyes. The voter roll maintenance provisions, she said quietly, her voice now normal volume for the first time in 20 minutes. States need to be able to clean their rolls of inactive voters. Crockett nodded encouragingly. I agree completely, and this bill doesn't prevent that. What it does is require that states use reliable data sources when removing voters and give people notice before their registration is canceled. It prevents situations where eligible voters show up on election day only to find out they've been purged from the rolls without their knowledge. But the timeline, Conway started. You're concerned it could allow ineligible voters to remain on the rolls? Crockett asked helpfully. Yes, exactly. Crockett flipped to another section. Actually, the bill requires immediate removal upon proof of death or criminal conviction that affects voting rights. The notice requirement only applies to address changes in voters who haven't participated in recent elections. Would you like to see the specific language? Conway stared at the bill, then at Crockett, then back at the bill. The woman who had spent 20 minutes screaming about election fraud was confronting the reality that she may not have understood the legislation she was attacking. I may have misunderstood some of these provisions, she admitted quietly. Tassav, admission hung in the air like a confession. Conway, the political veteran who had built her reputation on never admitting error, had just acknowledged she had been wrong. But Crockett wasn't interested in victory laps. With the same gentle tone, she continued, It's easy to misunderstand complex legislation, especially when we're getting our information from summaries or partisan talking points rather than the actual text. That's why I always try to read the bills myself before forming opinions. Conway nodded slowly, looking deflated. And that's why, Crockett said, her voice now carrying unmistakable moral authority. I think it's important that we have these conversations based on facts rather than assumptions about each other's character. Because when we start from the assumption that people we disagree with are evil or stupid or corrupt, we stop listening to each other. And democracy can't work without listening. She leaned back in her chair, but her voice remained strong. I don't think you're evil, Kellyanne. I think you care about election integrity just like I do. I think you want American democracy to be strong and trustworthy, just like I do. We may disagree about methods, but I believe we share the same fundamental values. Conway looked up, and for the first time since the segment began, she seemed to see Crockett as a person rather than an opponent. I appreciate that, Conway said, her voice barely above a whisper. These issues are important to me. They're important to me too, Crockett replied with a warm smile, and that's exactly why we should be able to discuss them respectfully, with facts and good faith, rather than assumptions and accusations. The transformation was complete. What had begun as a verbal assault had become a teaching moment about how democracy should work. The moment the segment ended, the internet exploded. Within 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett was trending on Twitter. The clips were everywhere. But it wasn't just Conway's screaming that caught fire. It was Crockett's masterful response that really captured America's attention. The first viral clip showed Conway's "Stop being so reasonable" outburst, with Crockett's calm expression captioned, "When someone yells at you for being logical." It hit 100,000 views in the first hour and kept climbing exponentially. But the clip that really exploded was longer, showing Conway's conspiracy Accusations followed by Crockett's gentle but firm response about democracy and listening. A prominent civil rights attorney shared it with the caption, "This is what leadership looks like in 2024. Calm, factual, and focused on solutions instead of drama." Late-night comedy seized the moment instantly. Comedians across the network landscape mocked Conway's high-pitched, "Stop being so reasonable," while praising Crockett's unflappable composure. Stephen Colbert opened his monologue. "Kellyanne Conway literally yelled at someone for being too reasonable. What's next? Getting angry at someone for being too prepared, too informed, too professional?" The memes flooded social media with unprecedented speed. The most popular format showed Conway screaming with everyday captions. "When the restaurant is out of your favorite dish. When Netflix removes your show mid-season. When someone asks you to cite your sources." But what made this meme explosion unique was that many actually celebrated Crockett's composure, rather than just mocking Conway's breakdown. The most shared meme showed Crockett maintaining her pleasant expression with the caption, "How to win an argument without raising your voice, a masterclass." It turned the viral moment into a genuine teaching tool about effective communication wrapped in internet humor. News outlets struggled to find precedent for what they had witnessed. Political debates usually follow predictable patterns. 2. People arguing past each other, interrupting, making partisan points. But this had been something entirely different. CNN's headline read, "Congresswoman's calm response to screaming opponent goes viral, sparks discussion about political discourse." The article noted that Crockett had managed to turn what appeared to be an ambush into a teachable moment about how democracy should work. MSNBC brought on political scientists to discuss the Crockett method, responding to aggression with calm facts rather than matching the aggression. Dr. Jennifer Mercieka from Texas A&M University explained, "What we saw from Congresswoman Crockett represents a fundamentally different approach to political communication. Instead of engaging in what we call attack and defend rhetoric, she used what psychologists call de-escalation through validation and redirection." Even Fox News, despite their typical partisan leanings, found it difficult to defend Conway's performance. Tucker Carlson's show ran the clip with the commentary, "Look, whatever you think about the politics here, Crockett handled this professionally. Conway let her emotions get the better of her." Political communication experts were fascinated by the exchange. Georgetown University's Dr. Kathleen Hall Jamieson published a real-time analysis. Crockett demonstrated several advanced techniques, acknowledging her opponent's emotions without validating the behavior, asking clarifying questions instead of making counter-accusations, and using specific textual evidence rather than general talking points. This is graduate-level political communication. Universities across the country began incorporating the exchange into their curricula within days. Political science professors used it as a case study in effective communication strategies. Psychology departments analyzed it as an example of emotional regulation under extreme stress. Harvard's Kennedy School published a paper titled "The Crockett Method: Calm Authority as Political Strategy," which broke down exactly how the Congresswoman had maintained control of the conversation without ever raising her voice or resorting to personal attacks. Communication schools started teaching the Crockett technique as a method for handling hostile questioning. The key elements they identified were: acknowledge the emotion behind the attack without validating the behavior, redirect to factual discussion using specific evidence, 3. Ask clarifying questions rather than making counter-accusations. Maintain consistent tone regardless of opponents' escalation. Treat opponents as potentially good faith actors, even when they're behaving badly. Business leaders and corporate trainers saw immediate applications. Human resources departments began using the clip in training sessions about conflict resolution and professional communication. Executive coaching programs incorporated Crockett's techniques into their curricula for dealing with difficult board meetings and hostile negotiations. Several Fortune 500 companies reported using the viral moment as a teaching tool for maintaining composure during high-stress presentations. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella tweeted, "Every executive should watch how Jasmine Forrest handled this situation. Masterclass in leadership under pressure." The international response was equally significant. The clip went viral globally, with foreign language versions appearing with subtitles. International viewers commented on the stark difference between the two approaches, with many praising Crockett's diplomatic skills while expressing concern about Conway's aggressive American political style. A major European newspaper ran the A headline, American Political Debate When Shouting Meets Silence. The article used the exchange to discuss different approaches to democratic discourse, with political commentators in other countries analyzing the effectiveness of calm authority versus aggressive confrontation. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's communication director tweeted, "This is what mature political discourse looks like. Disagree on policy, not on character. Lead with facts, not emotions." Perhaps most significantly, the viral exchange highlighted a clear generational divide in how Americans preferred their political leaders to behave. Polling data showed that voters under 40 overwhelmingly preferred Crockett's approach, while older voters were more split. Focus groups conducted by major networks revealed telling differences. Younger viewers described Conway's behavior as embarrassing, unprofessional, and exactly what's wrong with politics today. They described Crockett as presidential, someone I could trust with important decisions, and the kind of leader we need more of. Older viewers were more divided. Some appreciated Conway's passion and willingness to fight, while others found her behavior over the top and praised Crockett's class and professionalism. This generational split had immediate political implications. Democratic strategists noted that Crockett's performance could be a model for attracting younger voters who were turned off by traditional political combat. Republican strategists worried that Conway's approach might alienate the very demographics they needed to win future elections. The immediate fundraising impact was significant. Democratic donors responded to Crockett's performance with a spike in contributions. Progressive organizations started sharing the clip as an example of effective political communication that proved you could be strong without being loud. But the impact went beyond partisan politics. The exchange had become a cultural moment, a viral sensation that transcended typical political divides and offered a different vision of how public discourse could work in America. What made the Crockett-Conway exchange truly historic wasn't just the viral clips or the late-night comedy sketches. It was what happened in the days and weeks that followed, as millions of Americans began to reassess what they wanted from their political leaders. Teachers across the country started using the clip in civics classes, not as a partisan political statement, but as an example of constructive versus destructive discourse. High school government teachers reported that students were genuinely engaged by the contrast, with many saying it was the first time they'd seen a political debate where someone actually listened and responded, rather than just waiting for their turn to attack. Dr. Maria Santos, a high school teacher in Phoenix, told her local newspaper, "My students have grown up thinking politics is just people screaming at each other. This clip showed them it doesn't have to be that way. They're asking questions about policy details for the first time all year." Corporate America took notice too. The Harvard Business Review published an article titled, "What Business Leaders Can Learn from Jasmine Crockett," analyzing her techniques for maintaining authority while de-escalating conflict. Management consultants began incorporating her methods into executive training programs. Religious leaders across denominations used the exchange as a teaching tool about grace under pressure and treating opponents with dignity. Pastor Rick Warren tweeted, "This is what it looks like to disagree without being disagreeable." Jasmine Forrest just gave us all a masterclass in Christian grace. The psychological profession was equally intrigued. Dr. John Gottman, famous for his research on relationship dynamics, analyzed the exchange for Psychology Today. What we see here is emotional regulation at the highest level. Crockett demonstrates that you can be assertive and strong while remaining calm and respectful. It's exactly the opposite of what we usually see in high-conflict situations. Mental health professionals began using clips from the exchange in therapy sessions, particularly for patients struggling with anger management or conflict resolution. The contrast between Conway's emotional dysregulation and Crockett's emotional intelligence provided a powerful visual teaching tool. For Conway, the aftermath was more complicated. While her career wasn't destroyed, the viral moment became a case study in how not to handle political disagreement. She tried damage control through social media, posting, "Had a spirited discussion about voting rights today. Sometimes passion comes through as intensity, but the issues are too important for politeness." But the response from her own followers was brutal. "Kellyanne, yelling at someone for being reasonable isn't passion, it's poor behavior. She stayed calm while you lost control. That's not about politeness, that's about professionalism. Maybe try reading the actual bill next time before going on TV to attack it." For Crockett, the viral moment was both an opportunity and a challenge. She had gained millions of new followers overnight, but she also had to figure out how to use this attention constructively. Her response was perfectly on brand. She posted a simple video message. "Thank you to everyone who watched today's discussion. This is exactly why we need to focus on facts and treat each other with respect, even when we disagree. Democracy works best when we listen to each other. Leadership we need more of." She turned what could have been a shouting match into a lesson about how democracy should work. And, finally, a politician who shows that you can be strong without being loud. But perhaps the most significant impact was on how other politicians began to approach their own media appearances. Democratic candidates across the country started incorporating elements of Crockett's approach, staying calm under attack, asking clarifying questions, and treating opponents as potentially good-faith actors even when they were behaving badly. Several Republican politicians privately acknowledged that Conway's performance had been counterproductive and began coaching their own members on maintaining composure during hostile interviews. The Conway-Crockett exchange became more than just a viral moment. It became a case study in how political communication could work differently. Instead of two people talking past each other, viewers had watched one person try to attack while the other tried to understand and respond. The fact that the person trying to understand had won so decisively sent a message to politicians across the spectrum. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. In a political environment defined by division and anger, Jasmine Crockett had shown that there was still power in being reasonable, still strength in staying calm, and still victory to be found in treating opponents with respect while standing firm on principles. The viral success of her approach suggested that maybe, just maybe, Americans were ready for a different kind of political discourse. One where the goal was understanding rather than destruction, where strength was measured by composure rather than volume, and where winning meant finding solutions rather than scoring points. 3 months after the exchange, polling showed that 73% of Americans preferred politicians who stay calm during disagreements and focus on facts over those who show passion through forceful arguments. The number was even higher among voters under 35, at 84%. Political consultants began advising their clients to study the Crockett method. Campaign schools started teaching de-escalation techniques alongside traditional debate prep. The entire industry began to recognize that viral moments weren't always about the loudest voice. Sometimes they were about the steadiest one. But perhaps the most telling impact came from an unexpected source. 6 months later, Kellyanne Conway appeared on another political talk show. When her opponent began raising his voice and making personal attacks, Conway did something nobody expected. She stayed calm. "I think we can discuss this policy disagreement without questioning each other's motives," she said quietly. The host and audience were stunned. Conway had learned something from her encounter with Crockett. In her post-show interview, Conway was asked about her changed approach. "I realized that screaming doesn't make your point stronger," she admitted. "Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is listen." It was a remarkable transformation and proof that even the most entrenched political warriors could evolve. What do you think about this incredible transformation in American political discourse? Did Jasmine Crockett's approach change how you think about political debates? Have you tried using her techniques in your own disagreements? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share a time when staying calm helped you win an argument, or tell us about a political moment that changed your perspective. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that reshape American politics. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our analysis of the debates, discussions, and decisions that define our democracy. And here's a challenge. The next time you find yourself in a heated disagreement, whether it's about politics, family issues, or workplace conflicts, try the Crockett method. Stay calm. Ask clarifying questions. Focus on facts rather than assumptions. And treat the other person as someone who might have legitimate concerns, even if they're expressing them poorly. Because this exchange proved something powerful. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room to be heard. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the most weight. In the end, Kellyanne Conway screamed, but Jasmine Crockett spoke, and the world listened. The question is, what kind of voice will you choose to be?